So we're talking about 2 or 3 different government groups. We've got the finance group that's looking at the fiscal policy for the state. We've got the SBA that's looking at managing the pension assets of the state. We've also got some economic development groups that are trying to figure out how to grow those industries, the key industries for growth for the future. The question is, can we connect the dots between those groups and get them to have a joint shared vision for the future, and can we play a role in accelerating that? It's obviously going to play a larger role in job creation, address the fiscal solvency long term. And the last thing, and I think this group again is well positioned to address this, is to address the governance concerns. So anytime we talk about alternative investments, we have to realize that as an industry, I would say we have a brand challenge today. I don't know about you guys, but when I introduce myself as a hedge fund manager, I get really mixed results. You know, some people start looking for the horns in the back, and it's a real challenge. So if we're going to start talking about allocating hundreds of millions or potentially billions of dollars to the alternative investment community, which it's kind of funny, that's the first smile I've seen for like several faces around. You're like, wow, now I remember why I came here. If we're talking about investing billions of dollars to alternative investment funds, we have got to make sure that the correct governance processes are in place so that the people who are going to be put on the line to make that decision, basically the policy decision makers, have no concerns that they're going to be on the front page of the paper a year from now, with people asking why in the world were politicians making investments into alternative investments after all of the brand challenges we've experienced in the last couple of years. So there's a huge opportunity for us. There are a couple of barriers, a couple of obstacles that we have to address. I think collectively, particularly as an association, we're very well positioned to both capture that opportunity and put the things in place that are going to make that possible. Let's take a little view of the state's pension plan. It's a fairly sizable pool of money, talking 130 to 140 billion dollars. Most of us would probably be quite happy to get a chance to pitch to a pool of money of that size. It's the 4th largest state pension plan in the country, and it supports over 1 million current and retired Florida state employees. Currently, it's being run by Ash Williams. He's as I understand, the head of the State Board of Administrators. Ash is a strong sponsor of the alternative investment space. Prior to this position, he worked for a hedge fund, correct, Mike? Correct. Their target portfolio yield is 7.75%. Now, we're all investment folks. Put yourself in a portfolio manager's space for a second. If you have a $130 or $140 billion portfolio, and most likely you're going to allocate a large percentage of that to fixed income, most likely risk-free or low-risk assets that are yielding high 3%, high 4%. You've got maybe, let's say you allocate 50% of your fund to assets of that nature. You're going to have to figure out how to generate fairly significant returns on the other 50% or 40% or 30% to achieve that 7.75 investment target. That's where alternative investments clearly have an opportunity to differentiate. Right now, they have 5% of the fund allocated to alternative investments. There is a significant, there's some significant momentum to try to raise that minimum allocation from 5% to even as high as 20%. And at the end of the day, that represents a pool of money that is going to be allocated to different investment strategies in the range of $20 billion. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Are you taking questions during this?
Sure. Let's have this. We're kind of all industry guys. Let's talk.
Yeah. Before we get too deep into it, where did they come up with that 7.75%?
It's an objective. I guess it's the target portfolio return at the end of the day.
It's based off of the liabilities that they forecast. It's through actuarial studies, and in order to meet the liabilities that are going to be placed over a certain period of time, they come up with the
It's not based on that testing of asset class return portfolio, that strategy is based on what they need to be where they want to be down the road.
I would guess it probably has as much to do with what they're hoping to achieve. Yeah, boy, 7 3/4 sounds pretty good.
I could,
Cambridge.
yeah.
If we can get through the presentation and hold the Q&A until
Okay.
the end, I'd really appreciate it.
Okay.
So,
So if we want to talk about, well, before we get into the kind of components of the opportunity, let's take a step back because I wasn't aware of this, and I imagine not everyone in the room is aware of what the state of Florida considers its strategic industry clusters. So as the state defines them, there are 8 clusters for growth that the state is working to support. The first is clean technology. Kind of
Technology?
clean, that's the right question to ask, right? It runs the gamut from solar, ocean, smart grid technologies to looking at environmentally friendly, low impact energy solutions. Looking at the life sciences area, biotech, medical device manufacturing, pharma, and healthcare. With some of the assets within the state, whether it's the Scripps Institute or University of Florida, University of Miami, there's some pretty significant life science assets within the state. IT, I mean, every state's been trying to grow IT for 15, 20, 30 years, but there are some significant assets within the state as well. Aviation and aerospace, kind of interesting with the NASA facilities within the state. Pretty significant competitive advantage there. Homeland security and defense. Importantly to this group, financial and professional services are listed as one of the 8 core industries for growth in the state. That's one of the reasons that we're hopeful that we can bring economic development to the table, not just as finance as an enabler, but finance as a core industry for growth for the state.
Is agriculture in there?
It is not.
Okay.
Yeah, it is not. And that's probably a good thing. From an economic development perspective, we all know that you need to be working up the value-added curve. And finally, emerging technologies, kind of a catch-all for everything else. Material science, nanotech, marine science, that type of stuff. So just kind of to orient ourselves as this is the way that the state kind of looks at its trajectory for growth from an economic development perspective. So the FLAIA, let's talk about the role that we as a community can play. We're really right in the perfect position between government, industry, business creation, job creation, to develop a shared vision for the state. Obviously, we're not going to be driving the primary drivers of that vision, but we have an opportunity to plant some seeds in the minds of key politicians as to if you want to grow these industries and you want to address the #1 impediment for growth, which is access to capital, we're really the people that you need to be talking to. We've got deep applied expertise, obviously, in alternative investments. If the state is looking to allocate those sums of money to alternative investment strategies, I think we would like to have a seat at the table when those discussions are happening. We've got what I would say a deep bench of expertise, whether it's controls, investment strategy, asset allocation, governance. We can kind of run the gamut in terms of the types of resources we can provide to this effort. And finally, one of the efforts that we're going to talk about more or less is an effort to connect the dots between government stakeholders and industry. And that's going to be a communications, public relations, and something of a lobbying effort that we need to figure out what the right way to approach is. At the end of the day, the FLAIA really is that right group to represent the financial industry in this process. We've pulled together a team that I think is fairly accomplished. We want to say thank you to Alberto Cardenas for hosting this today. We are really hoping that Al and Al's firm will agree to represent us in the government relations space. Michael Corselli has been a very I would say, visionary guy in this space. We've been joking with him for a little while. It feels a little Don Quixote-esque, right? Oh, I'm sorry? Let's see, what is it? Don Quixote-esque. That's what. Don Quixote-esque. You feel like you're jousting with windmills sometimes when you have a vision, especially when it's a vision with a lot of moving parts. It requires people to think a little bit outside of what their normal point of reference is or their frame of reference is. Mike is really the guy for a good couple of years that has seen the role that this community can play in helping move things forward for the state, but also establish the Florida financial services industry as a really leading center for financial services in the country. For program strategy, I'm helping Mike and the other board members define some of these opportunities and the best way to frame it in ways that both government and industry and all the different stakeholder groups can really understand it and get behind it. We've got program management, resources, legal counsel, Jay Gould. Some of you may know Jay. He's a senior partner at Pillsbury and a big legal name in the alternative investment space. He's agreed to work with the group pro bono. And Maurice, who presented earlier, has agreed to represent us from a governance and controls perspective. So the goal is, I think, to wrap up. The goal is to demonstrate that the FLA-IA has A, a vision, and a vision that we think will really work. B, we've got the resources, we've got the expertise, we've got the bodies to throw at this, we've got the connections, and that we have the desire to step up and help move the state forward in really important ways, and hopefully all share in this collectively as a community.